My name is Neil McInnes Barker. I'm the Director of the Department of Veterans Services, and I'll be your host this evening. And welcome to the first of our final events of the Veterans Appreciation Week. We started on Monday and continued all the way to yesterday with food, activities, restorative therapies, art demonstrations, and social meetups with giveaways. Today, we had our observance at the cemetery and a luncheon at the American Legion Marsh Post. So we're trying to engage the citizens of Cambridge as well as the veterans to not just stand and give a speech with our flag lapel pin and say thank you for your service. We're trying to put our our money where our mouth is by providing services for folks. Last year we did a Appreciation Day, and we have extended that to this Appreciation Week. So now it's time for our very first Veterans Town Hall. I'd like to thank the Cambridge Public Library for hosting us here on this very chilly day. I still have my thermals on, so I think I might be sweating in a little bit. I didn't have a chance to change out of those. I want to once again thank you at the cemetery to thank my staff, the city, all the volunteers and participating organizations who joined the department to make this week a truly meaningful one for our veterans, their dependents, and survivors. I know that today's town hall will succeed at giving veterans of all wars from every generation a chance to share their unique experience with the residents of this city. The town hall is based on our Native American community's tradition of warrior storytelling. Native communities welcome their warriors home from combat with forums where those who fought recount their experiences to those they fought for. These forums allow warriors to share the unique burdens of combat across the entire community and allow the community to better understand the significance of sending their warriors to fight. In addition to our veterans who will speak, there will be one scheduled brief interruption. This will occur at 2:11 p.m. for our national moment of silence. I'll come back up to lead us at that time. But for now, I want to quickly introduce the mayor, as Mayor Denise Simmons would like to say a very quick word. And then I will introduce our moderator, Andrew Stern, who's sitting here, and you can raise your hand. So Andrew is going to help out if you want to demonstrate. He's going to, for our veterans who are going to speak, he's going to hold up these signs to give you an idea of when you're getting close to be ready to finish. And because we have a small attendance today for our first event, we actually will ask our veterans to feel free to speak for a full 10 minutes, maybe even a little longer. It's up to you. Whatever feels natural, no pressure. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Neil. He says no pressure, but he says don't talk long. That's a lot of pressure for an elected official. Good afternoon. You have permission from me, not from Neil, to say good afternoon back. So good afternoon. Good afternoon. It is really great to be here. As Neil has said, we started our week off with a bunch of activities, and I just have to talk briefly, I promise, about that. This is the first time we've done this kind of work, and I just have to say that I am so proud of Neil McInnes Barker and his staff for what they have done in the last several years to really raise the profile of veterans and veteran services in Cambridge. Please join me in thanking him and his staff. Not to underscore what other administrations have done, but Neil has really kind of turned up the heat and made us think more, be more proactive as opposed to reactive, and I just can't be thrilled, so I can't say enough about him. So today is a day that we typically observe veterans. November 11th, we gather to honor, commemorate, give thanks to the brave individuals who've served and have served in uniform to protect our country. These brave men and women deserve our eternal gratitude and solemn vow that we will honor their service by never by never taking for granted the freedoms and the liberties that they fought for. But there was something else that our speaker, if I can call him by his first name, Loren, had said today. Veterans Day is not Memorial Day. It is not to memorialize so much veterans, but just to say thank you, thank you, thank you for what you have done, for what you gave up, to thank the families for all the work that they put into supporting the individual that went to serve, be it man or be it woman. So I just want to say on behalf of our city, thank you so much. Again, thanks to the Department of Veteran Services for putting on and doing this work. Thanks to our city manager, because you can't do these kind of programs without the support of the city government. So Louis D. Pasquale, our city manager, would you please stand and be acknowledged? Mr. Di Pasquale has been our city manager for a little less than a year, but he has been really strong about supporting programs, and Neil could not do this work, and nor his staff, if it not for Louis and of course the city council who support Louis in doing this work. This town hall meeting was a stroke of genius in that it is not about us. It's not about the city manager or Neil or even me. It's really about the veterans. It's about you. Having a place to talk to us where we are committed to listening to you. We want to hear what's in your hearts and minds. We want to hear those stories. And based on what you tell us, we want to take that and turn it back into action. Turn it back into support. Turn it back to arms around you so that you can continue to live your lives to the fullest. So please, I want you to feel as engaged as possible. And I can say to Neil and to you, and I think I can even put Louis on notice on saying this, that we will continue to do this. So you are at our inaugural event of our town meetings. Each veteran at the end of the program will be given one of these proclamations, and these proclamations basically speak to the wonderful work that you have done on behalf of our country, on our state, and our city. As I said, we wouldn't be able to do this kind of work if it wasn't for the support of our city manager, but also elected officials, and I've noticed that our state senator, Sal DiDomenico, please raise your hand to be acknowledged, came in. And I want to thank Sal, who has been strongly in support of veteran services. Thank you. You know, I want to sit down because I said I wouldn't speak too long because Neil said I couldn't speak long. I'm going to remember that. But I do want to say something that stands out for me. Last year, through the efforts of Neil and his staff, we reinterred Ronnie Sparks. Ronnie Sparks was a Korean time veteran who was missing in action for years. And last year, through the work of Neil and his family, they found his remains and brought him home. But through that process, we also was connected to Moses Moore, who I've known forever, and his daughter Debbie saw this write-up and got Moses to come, and it was like a reunion. The Moore family with the Sparks family, these two men went to school together back in the day of the Houghton School. And so I just want to speak because this is the kind of work that we are doing in Cambridge through our Office of Veteran Affairs, and I want to applaud that and I want to lift it up. I also want to acknowledge someone that's here today, my good friend Red Mitchell, who's a World War II veteran. I often say and tell people we share a birthday together. You know, our birthday's on October 2nd. He's 90, I am not. So as I stand down, I want to thank each of you and your families for your service to our country, because if whether you went to serve in the military or you, the family had stayed behind, it was because of all of that our country can enjoy the freedom that it has. So this is your meeting. Before I stand down, let me acknowledge a veteran in my midst, Craig Kelly, City Council Craig Kelly. Thank you for being here, Craig. Please stand so we'll know who you are. So on behalf of the citizens of Cambridge, the City Council, and the elected, we want to say to the families, to our veterans and to their families, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think for, as far as a public figure, that was fairly brief. Thank you. So, for our veterans who are going to speak, We have, this is going to be the spot where you speak, but we also have some microphones, and there's plenty of water up here if you get thirsty. And again, in your eye line is Andrew Stern, who's going to be giving you signals as to how much time you have left. We also have a little timer on the podium. At this time, I would like to invite up our veterans who are going to speak to sit on the stage if you are comfortable doing so. However, you do not need to. This is a town hall forum, so you can remain in your seats. And when we do call you up from the roster, you're just going to walk up the ramp and come this way. So I'm just going to introduce Andrew Stern. Andrew Stern is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Andrew served from 1987 to 1995 and was assigned to the Marine Wing Support Squadron 473 as a sergeant during Operation Desert Storm. Andrew holds a BS in electrical engineering from Worcester Polytech Institute and is a teaching fellow at Harvard University focused on wind, solar, and water innovation. Please welcome Andrew Stern.
Thank you very much, Neil, Mayor. As Neil said, my name is Andrew Stern, and I'll be acting as the MC for today's inaugural event, the Veterans Town Hall. First, to our friends in the press, thank you for attending. We greatly appreciate your respecting the intent of this event by remembering that all veterans' comments are deeply personal. While this is an open press event, I would ask that you please respect the privacy of these veterans by asking either a member of our staff or the veterans themselves if they want to be on record. As it is right now, all of the veterans that have volunteered to speak have voluntarily accepted the press recording them. Today, there are many vets who would like to speak and many non-veterans in attendance. In order for the town hall to be successful, my role is to ensure that the event honors the following agreements and expectations. A number of veterans have already indicated to us that they'd like to speak, and I'll introduce each by name, branch, occupation, and years of service. Once all the veterans have gone up, I'll open the floor to other veterans and other veteran attendees to speak. Each veteran will have 10 minutes to speak about their service means to them, and while you do not need to use the full 10 minutes, I will ask that you do not go over 10 minutes unless Neil approves it. This is an opportunity for veterans to tell their stories with honesty, and the stories may express pride, grief, anger, or any combination of feelings. Non-veterans also have an important role. As witnesses, non-veterans will be listeners. Actively listening without judgment or interruption is one of the most powerful and supportive roles a community can offer to return warriors. Throughout the event, you may hear something you agree or disagree with. You may have a question or may want to say encouraging words with the intention to help. However, we ask that you please refrain from responding to any speaker at this time. Having laid out these ground rules, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and that's Red. Red, come on up. Our first speaker today is Red T. Mitchell, who's a junior. Yes. And he's a veteran of the Army, where he was a medic for 3.5 years during World War II. Red, sir, it's my pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, my friends.
Good afternoon.
Not morning. That's thank you. I always like to follow the leader. And I want to share a few feelings tonight, this afternoon. So I'm not going to give a speech because I've been told I talk too much already. But there is a message that I have to share with you. So first, I usually wear that hat that says I'm a World War II vet, because that helps me to begin my conversation with you, that I'm the youngest. meaning at age 90, which I am, and the mayor is not, that's the youngest you can be, and still be a World War II vet, which I am and so very proud of, unless you went in underage, which at this particular time in our country, patriotism was so strong. Youngsters, 12, 13, especially 12, being a Boy Scout, everybody wanted to become a member of the great army that has defeated the world and made us one nation, which I will share with you my thoughts on that. So I'm the youngest, meaning again, however, when I joined, it was to my shock, because I was raised in a little town in western Pennsylvania called Newcastle, Pennsylvania, known more for football than perhaps anything else. We'll share that a little bit with you too. But patriotism was taught to us from day one. I remember the first time I heard the word veteran. We lived in a town that was a small town, and this elderly gentleman came and knew my dad from a previous time, a much younger man than my dad, but I was told that he would be staying with us for a little bit because he was traveling through and had no place to stay, but he was a Buffalo Soldier. I said, what the heck is a Buffalo Soldier? That was very funny to me, and I started to laugh. But then I began to understand, and over the years, it became much more meaningful. My story, when I first went in the military, I noticed that all the officers didn't look like me, but they were understanding and appreciative and wanted to make me the best soldier possible. So I was one of these guys that had been in the Boy Scouts, and as the war was moving right along, because I joined just as we were dropping the bombs on Japan. And so that's when I was turning 18. I said, Mom, can I join now? She says, well, you're almost 18 now, so I can't stop you. So that's when I got in. I'm saying that to say that patriotism was taught and raised from the time that I can remember, that first Buffalo Soldier. And I had other members of my family, my uncles, that it was between the Army, if you could get in, and the so-called CCC camp, which is sort of like a training military thing. Because we were in the hard part of coming through the Great Depression. Now I'm saying all of this to set up my going into the Army, because what I discovered, a lot of black men were joining and wanting to join, yes, the patriotism, but the number one thing was jobs, and opportunity, maybe, and education. But still that I too am an American was there. So I've just been home and I'm now traveling to my first assignment, Camp Neosho in Missouri. Suddenly the train started slowing down and started to rock. I said, what's going on? I'm here proudly sitting in my military uniform, and I soon hear the train stopping and so forth. Everybody's getting up, and I see the movement of these soldiers, all looking alike, except for their faces. The white faces going in one direction in their cars, and the black face is going to another. I said, what the heck's going on here? Mason-Dixon line. What? Somebody tell me what's going on? Here I am here, proudly whistling inside of myself some of those old songs that they sang about. The first time I became face to face with racism, because I came from a little community, and I have shared this with my dear friend. My dad was an auto mechanic in this small town, and he did exceedingly well because my dad spoke 4 different languages fluently, representing the 4 major communities in the town that I grew up in. And being able to speak their language, they could communicate. Now I find myself in a situation that's very strange to me. I've always been part of what's going on. Like in the community that I was raised in was primarily Polish, and the word, my name is Red, and red in Polish is Czerwonia. So when I go home, all of my friends say, hey, Czerwon!
Red, I'm just going to interrupt you here for one moment. You have plenty more time, as I said before, but we started a little late, so we're going to do our moment of silence, and I'd like you to stay up here with me if you don't mind. I didn't want to interrupt a veteran. I was trying to time it so we didn't have to, but so I'd like to take a brief moment to introduce a 2-minute moment of silence. Out of respect for this moment, please silence and put aside your digital devices. In addition to remembering the nation's fallen, we ask you to reflect on the more than 22 million American veterans who share in our collective freedoms. We are doing this across all the United States time zones simultaneously, from 11 p.m. in Puerto Rico and westward to Hawaii, where the ritual is occurring at 9/11. This is to accommodate the historic 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, when the armistice between Germany and the Allied nations came into effect. The armistice month and day and time inspire our present Veterans Day. We did this for the first time at 2:11 p.m. during Veterans Appreciation Day in Cambridge, a month after the Moment of Silence Act was signed into law by President Obama. I'll confirm the time when it occurs. We are just about a minute away, and then I'll just put on a timer for 2 minutes. I think this is going to be a 3-minute moment of silence. It is now 2:11. Thank you. Thanks very much for participating in this moment of reflection. You may be interested to know that the Moment of Silence Act was inspired by two Massachusetts brothers, Daniel and Michael Bennetson, who wish to honor our veterans with a 2-minute moment of silence, just as Canada, England, and Israel do. They brought this wish all the way to our nation's capital to honor those who have served. We're glad to bring this moment to you. And do you remember your stopping point in that? I'm remembering,
Yes.
facing two different directions. I'm loving it. So, and we have CCTV here who are recording, and you are like me, where you like to move around a lot. So you have two options. You can continue what you're doing, and the recording will be okay, or you can stand here, and the recording will be great, or you can hold this and wander around, and the recording will be great. Thank you. Which do you like?
I'm back on track now, so I can. As I was saying, I was on real train tracks at that particular time, but I remember the shock that I received at being different. And here I am in a uniform, and the first defiant moment of anger came upon me. I said, what's going on here? So I began to question. And I had all the confidence in the world that I was doing the right thing, I still wondered. As I said, we had just dropped the bombs on Japan. This was now my turn, my time, my age, for me to enter into the real fight, because the Japanese didn't surrender right away. But within 6 months after I'm in the service, I find myself in Germany, in the so-called Army of Occupation, where the fighting war and the bomb dropping was over, but the devastation was still there, and the misunderstanding was still there. But I had a chance to talk to those young men, just a few years older than me, that had been through that battle, that kind of thing you used to see in the movies with the John Wayne and all of that stuff. But they were reluctant to share their story with anybody except the young guys like me that was just coming over there. Said, look, I want to tell you something. This experience that we have had, black men and white men, young men, saying this to me, how ridiculous is it? Here we are fighting against the #1 racist of all times in a segregated army. When we get back home, things are going to change. Now, I listened to them carefully, because the stories that they shared with me, the experiences that they had, the things that made them the men that they were, the promises they made me believe that I knew that they were going to keep their promises. And let me explain how they truly did. I graduated from Duquesne University 1954. What's the significance of that? Other than 1954 was also the year that from Duquesne, they sent a young man named Chuck Cooper up for the Celtics to enjoy. But these young men had said to me, when we get back home, things were going to change. And yet, when I hear the talk about what they had to face, when they got back home, the veterans, they were veterans, but they were yet to begin to fight. And that's the story that I want to tell you. All due respect to the great Dr. Martin Luther King for all the work that he did, but for those of us who believe that the whole civil rights movement began and ended with him, I want you to know that 1954, the year I graduated from Duquesne University, was also the year of the great Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, that made separate schools illegal. That could have never happened because it was without the emphasis and the support of those men of the greatest generation. Because the Civil Rights Act that Lyndon Johnson signed, associated with Martin Luther King, 1964, 10 years later. So don't tell me that these men of the greatest generation didn't keep their promise to this little kid, Red Mitchell. However, they had to continue to fight because the big story at that time politically was the integration of the Army by Truman. And I was there as that was beginning. And I had a younger brother that I mentioned to another, but I won't tell you the whole story there, but who wanted to get in the Army with me. And so people will start to ask me about my brother Lloyd, what happened to him, and I mentioned about how he had caught that bad social disease. I think it's safe enough to say this, we're all adults here. I said, what do you mean? What are you joking about that? This was the time when Truman was desegregating the Army, but also a time where it was mixed feelings and attitudes about why are we fighting and what's this fighting all about. But some of these young men that had promised me that they were coming home were still in the military too. So the fight continued, but this story about my brother Lloyd, whatever happened to him, and I'll say this, you have to figure it out what I mean. This very unsociable place, or this social disease that I called it, gone to Korea. Oh. If I didn't tell that joke too well, I'm not a comedian. My story is just this. Without the participation of these veterans, these men that had made this promise, who had this experience, they're the ones that were the emphasis between the great civil rights movement, and I want to thank you all for allowing me to represent them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Red. That was a touching story. Thank you, Red. Thank you, Red. That was a very, very touching story. The next young lady we'd like to have up is Katrina Alban? Alban, sorry, from the Navy, surface warfare officer for 7 years, and is that Operation Enduring Freedom? For Operation Enduring Freedom. Katrina? Microphone? Okay, great, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today about my service and wartime experience. Red is a tough act to follow, so I'll try to keep it good for you guys. So I was 13 when 9/11 happened, and I remember watching the Twin Towers collapse on TV in my social studies classroom. At that age, you don't really understand a lot of what's going on in the news anyway, but we just sat there watching, astounded. It was a strange day of hushed whispers, frantic phone calls to parents, going home early. It was the one time you're not excited about going home early because it was in such an anxious state. My father, who was a Navy chief, was on shore duty at the time, meaning he wasn't operationally forward for the Navy. So as far as I remember, there wasn't any rush to ship him off. But I knew that he would later make several more deployments before he retired in 2005. And at that time, we had been in the war. I wish, for me personally, that I could say that the reason I joined the Navy was because of 9/11, but for me, it was something a little bit more personal. One of the stipulations of the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty was that it allowed Filipinos to enlist directly into the Navy. It was an extremely competitive program, but my father, he beat out hundreds of other Filipinos to snag one of the spots that they offered in 1985. In short, my siblings and I became American citizens by birth. My parents became American citizens after that through naturalization, and my father fulfilled 20 years of faithful naval service. So I knew that for me, without the sacrifices that my parents made, I would not have been blessed with the good fortune and opportunities that I had during my childhood. And so therefore, for me, I felt an obligation to give back to the Navy, which led me to accept a ROTC scholarship for college and ultimately receive my commission as a surface warfare officer. Question for everyone. Has anyone seen the movie Captain Phillips? This is my fun fact for the day. Anyone? So in that movie, the warship that is featured in it was actually my ship. And I'm in that movie. Doing my naval duties, of course. But for those who are not really familiar with what the Navy does or what a surface warfare officer does, that's what I usually tell them or reference them back to, because it's a pretty realistic depiction of what surface warfare officers do in the Navy, which is essentially driving ships and sometimes catching pirates. And so my first deployment was actually on that ship, and it was also the ship's maiden deployment as well. We were headed to the Middle East to patrol the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and the Gulf of Aden. I remember the plank owners, which is the term given to sailors who have been with the ship since her commissioning, bidding farewell to their loved ones on the pier. There was a sadness and apprehension and a certain level of excitement as well. I think whenever you pursue the unknown, there's a certain excitement that accompanies it. But their excitement helped ease my apprehension and sadness that I was feeling and reinforced my resolve to keep my head in the game and do everything that's necessary to ensure the safety and well-being of the crew. Like many others who have ever served, your resolve is tested often, but there's one in particular memory that has always stuck out with me, because it showed me that I had the resolve and strength to lead and make decisions when you need to, which is not something that you always know when you are joining the service at 22 years old. Me and my watch team were on the 0200 to 0700 watch, closing out the day, and there is this small patrol boat that's coming in fast toward the ship at a distance. You can't see whether it's armed or not. So we start to take action, increase speed, maneuver aggressively away from it so that you can cut them off. And they had armament on their patrol boat. So you never really know until the moment calls for it whether you're going to perform or not. You're indoctrinated at school that these are the things that you need to know and how to be a leader, but I'm not sure if you ever really know what that means until you're tested in the time of battle. And fortunately for us that day, we were able to protect the ship safely. Me and my watch team made all the right decisions that we need to ensure the safety of the 300 plus people that's on board. It's kind of crazy the kinds of things that we ask young sailors to do, the type of responsibility that you have to give to people such as myself, and the expectations of leadership that you bestow upon them at such a young age, and that trust. As I reflect on this, as I'm speaking to you, it's insane the amount of trust that you give people and expect them to take care of the daughters and sons of America, my peers as well. And as I mentioned before, it's the excitement that helped ease the apprehension and sadness that I was feeling, but you think that fear would be one of those feelings. And it's not until moments like those where you actually have the fear manifest itself, but not in a way where you're actually fearful of the enemy itself. More of the fear of letting your teammates down and not being able to protect them in the way that matters. So that is one of the monumental personal experiences that I had while being underway out to sea during Operation Enduring Freedom, and many more. But there are three main things that I came away with as a result of my service and wartime experience, and I'll share those with you. The first is that although the current force is an all-volunteer one, every American has a duty to serve and to be informed about what that means. You know, for whatever reason, people remain taken aback, faces filled with surprise and awe, when I still tell them I'm in the Navy. And I want to continue to make people aware that those affected by war are not specific to any one group, characteristic, or experience, and that these people have an important role in shaping how society understands service, especially for me, the daughter of Filipino immigrants and as a female Filipino-American immigrant serving in our armed forces. The second is how it's made me acutely aware of my mortality and how it's affected my outlook on life. I feel even more conflicted on whether I'm doing the right things to make a better impact, and if I'm doing the right things to make me happy, since the lives we've lived or are living are ones filled with constant sacrifice. Life is so short and so precious, and there's nothing like being on the front lines that reminds you of that. And third, there's no other bond as strong as the one shared amongst brothers and sisters in arms. It's a bond that's been forged in the struggle for survival, heartbreak, compassion, blood, joy, thrill, and faith. We have seen the best and worst in people, and we've seen the best and worst of ourselves when you're tested. Yet here we are today, in spite of the failures we've endured and the victories we've won, a testament to the warrior spirit that defines us as veterans. And all this is to say I'm absolutely proud and honored to be celebrating today with all of you, and thank you for helping pave the way for both me and my father in becoming a part of the world's greatest armed forces.
Thank you very much, Katrina. The next speaker I'd like to call up is John Salmon. John is a veteran of the Air Force, where he was security police. It's a good group to know if you're ever in the military. He served in Vietnam, and John, take it away. Yes. Thanks, John. Take it away. Right in the mic, or?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be here. I guess my story begins about 50 years ago this week, November 15th of 1967. As a young airman in the Air Force, I left to go to Vietnam. The base I was stationed at was Ben Hoa Air Base, which was about 18 miles northeast of Saigon. And it was a pretty large, one of the largest bases in Vietnam. I was a member of the security police unit, which was, our duty was to guard the outer perimeter of the base. First few months there were pretty uneventful, more getting used to the climate and the surroundings. But after the first of the year, we were receiving intelligence that the NVA and the Viet Cong were planning a major offensive in the south, and that was referred to as the Tet Offensive. And that occurred the last 3 days of January in 1968. And pretty much the intelligence was right on target. Almost every base and every large city in the north was either under attack or had already been overrun. And on January 31st, it was Ben Hoa's turn. Over 100 rounds of mortars and rockets came into the base at around 3 o'clock in the morning. And as you can imagine, it was just hectic. It was frightful. It was the scariest I've ever been. And shortly after the rockets and mortars stopped, trip flares started going off all along the eastern perimeter of our base. And trip flare would indicate that someone was coming over the fence lines. And my job, as well as my other fellows that are with me, was to guard the outer perimeter. Well, over a whole battalion of North Vietnamese and Viet Cong infiltrated the eastern side of the base. We fought them for a day and a half before it was over. And after that, for the next several months, 2 or 3 nights a week at least, we would receive rockets and mortars. That went on until pretty much May or June of that year, without any large infiltration again, but occasionally smaller firefights would take place. In June of '68, I was, along with several others, being one of the more experienced people, moved up to the Central Highlands at a base called Pleiku, which was right along the Cambodian border. And pretty much the same type of thing for the next few months until I rotated back to the States. I can just say that I was proud to serve then, and I'm now the commander of the VFW right here in Cambridge, and I'm proud to do that. And I thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, John. Our next speaker is Steve Young. Steve was in the Marine Corps, where he served in the infantry for 12 years, Operation Enduring Freedom, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Please welcome Steve Young. Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much. All right.
Fellow Marines, we like to shout at each other. I don't think there are other Marines here, at least not any Marine officers. So I don't need. Oh, sorry. Well, okay. So I will use small words for the rest for us. So that's welcome. I'm really glad to be here, and I've got many stories. Yeah. So I joined up. I was actually already in the process of enlisting when 9/11 happened. Figured I might as well continue on with it. I come from a long line of people who served in the military. Both my grandfathers served. My dad likes to say that he changes the story between either my grandpa jumped into Normandy with a typewriter on his back, or he waded ashore with a typewriter on his back. Either way, he was the fastest typist in the battalion. So, and then both my parents served, and my mom still proudly can fit into her uniform from back in Vietnam, which I don't even think my dad can wear his uniform from 3 years ago, but he probably can. I guess because he stayed in for 30 years, so his uniforms grew along with him. But, and then I joined. I served for a long time, and since I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to law school, and I'm a practicing lawyer now. I focus on international law, and I'm much more critical now of how the use of force is used internationally, especially by a big country like ours, but I don't need to talk about that today. I could cite various war crimes that I saw happen, committed by people who may have been wearing my similar uniform. But I would really actually like to speak about just how I think civilians think like, oh, those veterans went through a lot of crazy things, and it's scary to talk to them about it because they're harrowing experiences. And I'm super grateful for people that are willing to talk about those, and I'm willing to talk about some. But I think right now, I want to talk about some other silly things that happened that, like, I think happen a lot more regularly. As those who've been in the service know, a lot of your time is spent with like a hurry up and wait situation, so you're just standing around doing nothing while you're waiting to get shots or whatever, or waiting to get shot at, for instance. But lots of like goofy things happen, and I do remember the first time in Iraq we were getting shot at, and like bullets were whizzing over our heads, and there's tracers and everything, and I was the squad leader, and my assistant squad leader and I were looking over the berm, and we were both like, cool, like, is this really happening? Like, we couldn't believe, like, after seeing all the movies and everything and what happened, like, and like, we were glad that we hadn't panicked, at least up till that point. There was some panicking later, but like, because those shots were way over our heads. But it was really funny, like that for that very first time, we just looked at each other like, whoa, this is cool, we're doing it. We're really doing it. But that's probably the tamest of the stories. But there are many other goofy things that happen. In Iraq, on our little fob, there was like one trailer that had a bunch of showers in it, and like had big water tanks attached, and you get like one Navy shower a day where you just go rinse off, right? And at one point, someone went caca, if there are children in here, in the shower, and like it didn't drain, and it was there, and they didn't know who did it, and so they just like locked the showers and wouldn't let anybody use them for a while, but they didn't like clean it first. And so like after a few days, when they figured like letting people shower was a good idea after operating around in the desert and heat and everything, we went in there and it was clearly worse than it had been when it first happened, which was amazing. But yeah, so we just let the water run for a while, and anyway, but it's just one of those things that like someone makes a funky decision, who knows what happened. It turned out it was my platoon sergeant who'd had a gastrointestinal issue, but anyway, and he didn't get in trouble, but we all had to go without showers for a while, and it was very smelly for quite a while after that. Another time, and just Marines especially, I think, the joke is always like, you got to get them off the ship or they start breaking stuff, or because they're licking the walls and everything, or they're eating everyone else's crayons. And I can attest to, you get hungry. So, but one of my best friends, one evening when we were in Iraq, we were on you have different rotations, and we were on our like a backup rotation where we didn't have any assignments, but we were QRF and other things if other people needed help, right? And so people were just kind of doing whatever. And one friend was making his homemade Ouija board in order to appease the gods of war or whatever, the spirits of warriors past, while at the same time some other Marines in the platoon were practicing waterboarding on each other to see if it was really as bad as people think, and it turns out it's much, much, much worse. So we were all immediately on the bandwagon with like, yeah, that's not really like an enhanced interrogation, that's really something that's monstrous. But this is just Marines who were bored in between very exciting times, but bunch of knuckleheads. There was also times when like the silliness would bleed into operational issues. There was a platoon commander of one of our sister platoons that when I was on the quick reaction force, he was planning an operation, and so I was backing him up, and he had this long fancy plan for what they were going to do to meet up with a sheikh and then like coordinate their assault, our assault with their assault, and get out the bad guys that Al-Qaeda Iraq had sent in to stir up trouble. We actually had, we had a very good relationship with the Iraqis in Ramadi in our area, because most of the bad people were being sent from outside of Iraq, and they recognized we recognized that local folks were chill, and they were chill with us somehow, and we all worked together. Anyway, so they had this plan to work together to kick out these bad guys, but in his big plan, he never once talked about a route or where the plan was gonna happen or anything, and I'm sitting there like the guy who's supposed to come rescue him in case things went sideways, and this gunnery sergeant, bless his heart, we call him Gunny Gus Gus, because if you've seen Cinderella, the mouse, Gus Gus, he's wide and the pointy. The Gunny looked just like him. Anyway, so Gunny Gus Gus never even talked about a plan, he had a big plan. It was very weird to have such a intricate plan without having a route. And so it was very funny because he ended up out there and we had to go rescue him. It didn't go too sideways, but we still had to go out there, and it was, he was panicked, but because we got there late, because he was unable to even show us on a map where he had planned on going beforehand. And this was the same man who planned QRF operations when we would say, okay, we're coming back now from our regularly scheduled meeting, they would just launch for no reason in order to then write up and get a medal, which he did get several medals. So, I mean, he must have done something neat, bless his heart. We once had an XO who kept getting mad at my buddy who was in the company level intelligence cell. He kept getting mad at him because he's like, you're turning these intelligence briefs into me late. He's like, it's the 9th. You're turning in the intelligence briefing from the 8th. What's wrong with you? Like, you're always a day late. And he kept on getting like bad marks and bad reviews, but it's because like the intelligence is from what happened yesterday, sir, and like that captain, bless his heart, couldn't wrap his brain around the fact that you're getting told what happened yesterday. I can't tell you what's happening today because it hasn't happened yet. And that same Marine actually kept on getting bad marks because he'd volunteered to do a job above and beyond his normal job of infantryman, but because he wasn't actively doing infantry stuff, he kept on getting not promoted because it was very weird. There's lots of, your veteran friends have gone through a lot. Sometimes it's getting shot at, but one of the common descriptors of war is that it's like Disneyland, where it's long periods of extreme boredom, punctuated by brief periods of excitement, and that's very true. But in those long periods of boredom, there's some ridiculous stuff. So next time you say thank you for your service, have them tell you a ridiculous story, because we've all got plenty, and some aren't fit for family situations, but they're usually pretty funny. Thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you. Chief. Thank you very much, Steve, for sharing that with us. We're going right from the Marine Corps to the Navy. I don't know if there's much of a rivalry there. If we have Jeff Lyons up, he's an aviation electrician's mate. He spent 8.5 years in the Navy, Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, and New Dawn. Please welcome Jeff Lyons. Jeff?
Hey, thanks everybody for having me here today. I was born and raised just next door in Somerville, so thanks for having me over here in Cambridge today. I want to start off with talk a little bit about my background and why I joined the Navy, but just brief disclaimer, I was a Navy recruiter for 3 years, so if I sound like I'm talking or I'm selling the military too much to you, then I'm really not. I'm not a recruiter anymore. Yeah, I joined the Navy in 2008, and I served until 2016. I got out just last year. I joined the military after dropping out of college. I went to college for 2 years at Northeastern. Come from a pretty low-income family in Somerville. 2007 was pretty tough years for banks and people giving out student loans, so I was respectfully declined financial aid, and that's when I went and joined the military. A little bit of a rewind on that, though. Graduated high school in 2005. My plan was to join the military right out of high school. Apart from being a good guitar player, I had no other ambitions, and I wanted to serve my country. I was always very patriotic. I was always very thankful for the freedoms and the opportunities that we have in this country, which are unrivaled in the rest of the world. But obviously my parents watched the news and they weren't having any of that. 2005 was probably one of the peak and worst times in what was then becoming 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So my parents said, no, you have to go to college. And I did that, I tried it. I wasn't really invested in it. My GPA reflected that. The college experience was a lot of fun, not a lot of studying happening. And then eventually I joined the Navy. Had to tell my parents, like, hey, this was always plan A for me. So, but college didn't work out. So I went into the military. I went into the Navy. Became an aviation electrician's mate, where I served on Black Hawk helicopters. Navy calls them Seahawks. It's a H-60. It's a combat search and rescue helicopter that also does anti-submarine warfare. I served on the USS Ronald Reagan in San Diego, California. And based on your grades that you get in training, you get kind of first pick of whatever order you got to pick. And being born and raised in Boston and absolutely hating the weather that we have on days like today, the freezing cold, 30, 24 degrees last night I saw. I studied, I excelled, I did great, and I got orders first pick to San Diego. So, stark contrast from the student at Northeastern University with a 2.0 GPA. I was 99.9% in aviation school, and finally I got that discipline, that structure, that purpose in life, that sense of duty that really, invigorated me and caused me to kind of realize, I'm good at these things, and anything worth doing is worth doing well. So I went and served in San Diego, USS Ronald Reagan. I did 2 sea combat deployments with them to the Middle East, and a couple of other smaller training and sort of patrol tours with them. So I was in places in the Pacific, Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea, and the Persian Gulf in support of Iraqi freedom, Enduring Freedom, New Dawn, a lot of campaigns, a lot of fancy names for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Also involved in anti-piracy, like the young lady mentioned earlier. We were doing anti-piracy in Gulf of Aden and Yemen and Somalia and stuff like that. Port calls. That's the interesting part about being in the Navy, and that's probably, one of the best parts about being in the Navy is you get to go and visit a lot of cool places in the world. And, the Navy is the most fun out of the 4 branches of the military. Honorable mention to the Coast Guard, too. But, we're so much fun that the Marine Corps actually tags along with us a lot of the time and says, hey, and then we take them to fun places. I've got the opportunity to go to Singapore, Dubai, Phuket, Thailand twice, Sasebo, Japan, Bahrain, Oman, Hong Kong, Guam, Hawaii a dozen times, and Victoria in British Columbia, Canada. So those are some of the port calls. Those are always people's first questions, like what kind of places have you been? And a lot of these places aren't the most glamorous places to visit in the world. You really do see a lot of, especially a big battle group. A lot of countries don't really want, armed forces, military guys coming to their country. So we're not really going to the most glamorous parts of the world, and it really shows you how thankful you are for how good the freedoms and opportunities that we have in America to get exposed to all these cultures around the world and realize, this is the one place where freedom and democracy is truly respected, is in America. When people think about the military, they think about combat operations. I'm not a combat veteran myself personally. What I have done in the Navy was a lot of support of those troops that were in combat and search and rescue and anti-submarine and things like that, evacuations. But one of the most important operations I was involved in, one of the ones I'm most proud of, was called Operation Tomodachi. It's the humanitarian aid and disaster relief from the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and disaster that occurred in Japan. It is the strongest natural earthquake, natural disaster to ever have affected Japan or any part of that region in the world. As a result of the earthquake and the tsunami, 3 TEPCO Fukushima nuclear power plants began actively melting down, many of which are melting down to this day. The earthquake and the tsunami resulted in the deaths of 15,894 people. 6,156 people were injured. 2,546 people are still missing. I'm going to assume that they are most likely dead. 228,863 people were still living away from their homes in 2015. I have hundreds, up to 1,000 pictures of the devastation taken from the helicopter. We're talking about a tsunami that was up to 100 meters tall. That's about a 10-story building. A sustained wall of water that just comes and just swept away entire towns and entire roads. I watched this on the news at 6 at night in the mess decks on the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier somewhere out in the Pacific Ocean, and we were there 6 a.m. When I show up to work, they're like, hey, we're launching the helicopters as soon as the sun comes up. And what we were able to do is we acted as a refueling platform for helicopters and cargo aircraft. All the other helicopters in our battle group were coming to the aircraft carrier, picking up supplies that were dropped off by C2 cargo planes that were delivering pallets upon pallets of bottled water, food, supplies, jackets, blankets, things like that. In the first 24 hours, all that stuff was coming out of the mess decks. It was coming out of the food for the ship. It was coming blankets off our own beds, jackets off our own backs, going on the helicopters to deliver to these people. We delivered over 100 tons of food, water, and blankets, clothing, medical supplies to remote sites that were inaccessible by any other means than helicopter. Igor Sikorsky, I'm going to paraphrase this quote, but he famously said that, when you're somewhere and you're in trouble, a jet aircraft can fly overhead and drop a bouquet of roses on you, but it's only a helicopter that can come over and actually drop a ladder down, deliver supplies, and save people's lives. So I'm proud that I had that experience to be an aviation electrician, fixing those helicopters, keeping them running, and delivering those supplies to those people that were in need. So yeah, that wraps up what I've got to say about my service. I was a recruiter after that. I was in the hometown. One of the most important things that I got to do while I was a recruiter is tell these stories to young people, and basically tell them one of two things, and tell people such as yourself that one of two things. The military was a great experience. It was a great opportunity for me. The GI Bill and the benefits that I have as a result of my service, not to say that that's something that you should join to get, but it is a great asset to people who serve in the military, for people who come from backgrounds where you don't have those sorts of opportunities yourself. But to have those kinds of opportunities, I'm very thankful for, first and foremost. And then secondly, the NROTC program and scholarships like that. I got to deliver some of those NROTC scholarships to high school kids and tell them that, on behalf of somebody that couldn't afford to go to college, I'm grateful to have been delivered dozens of those checks that were worth $200,000 to people like me who couldn't be able to afford college otherwise, and to be able to give them that education where they could serve in the military and lead sailors, Marines, soldiers, airmen, and be some of the best that we have. So I'm thankful for those opportunities. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak here today, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was great. Okay, this is from...
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We've had some excellent speakers. I'd like to thank everyone. We still have a few more left. I'd like to call up Chris Colin. Chris is an Army veteran. Art 4, is that right, Chris? Art 4 was your occupation?
Infantry.
Oh, I'm sorry, infantry. It looks like Art 4 to me, for 3 years. And thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yes, sir. You want a mic or you?
No, I'll stand here, thanks. All right, thanks for having me. Much like Katrina said before, I was 13 when September 11th occurred. I grew up just north of New York City, so I was in English class in the morning when everything happened, and it was, like she said, it was kind of surreal. You don't really fully know what's going on. And then kind of throughout the day, it progressed, and we were sent home, and we had to fill out little sheets of paper that said hey, where are you going when you go home? How are you getting there? Who are you going to be with? And I remember me and my friends just wrote that, we're all going to each other's houses. And then what we actually did was we went down to the library in the small town of Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, where we had a view of the New York City skyline, and could actually see everything that was going on from there. So that's kind of how it started for me. And again, much like Katrina, that's wasn't really the sole reason I joined. I think my uncle, I was going to apply to West Point. My uncle was like, that's a great idea, but you should probably have some other options because it's hard to get in. You probably won't make it. Well, proved him wrong, and I'm here. But through that, and then branching infantry and going through all that training and Ranger School, I think it's an opportunity to learn more about yourself than you could in any other way. When there's not a lot you've got to kind of give you comfort, and you're out there in the cold and the rain, and it's nothing but your buddies and the other students and people around you that are counting on you, you really do kind of learn a lot about yourself. So from that, I went to Hawaii, and pretty much right after landing on the island, they threw me on a plane, and I made it to Afghanistan. And a couple months into that, I was fortunate enough to take over a platoon in our eastern Afghanistan in the Kunar River Valley, specifically in the Pesh River Valley. So some of you may kind of be familiar with some of the tributaries of that, the Korangal. So I know we've referenced Sebastian Younger and kind of his take on tribe and how we've gotten here. So he also filmed Restrepo, which was one of the outposts there. So we're the valley that was a tributary to. So if you're familiar with it, not the nicest place. And while I was there, our job was to partner with a bunch of the Afghan army people who, looking back kind of now and realizing, essentially they were deployed within their own country. And I think that's something we take for granted here is as we go to war and send people off to war, they're not here. They're not, in the country where they have to they can drive a couple hours and they're back home. But these people, that was the case for them. And so it was kind of hard to wrap my mind around what they were doing and why they were doing things they were. And it was really hard to understand. I think the hardest situation that we came across was they had an outstanding senior NCO for one of the companies, and he was the guy I could go to and tell him, I don't know why you guys are doing this. This is what you guys need to do, for security reasons, whatever. And he would get it done. He'd make sure it happened, and he was super helpful. So one day, we were gonna go do some big operation. They came to us, and he had been killed right next to their base was the river. And what they would do is they'd take these giant ammo cans down and fill them up with water from the river, which is a health question in and of itself. But it was right next to their base, and it was the only way they could consistently get resupplied with water. And so they went down to the same place they always went, the same time of day they always go. And somebody had planted an explosive device there, and he was killed. And so, we gave them a couple days. They held some memorials, and we went back out, and we drove out a couple days later to that same base. And as we're driving by, I look out the driver's side window of our trucks, and there's a group of them with their armor off, their rifles hanging in a tree, getting water from literally the same exact spot where just a few days earlier something had happened. And it just kind of blew my mind that they would do that. And I was like, hey, how do you not know? Obviously you've been doing it, something bad happened, but that's kind of when it became clear to me what happens when, within your own country, there's not the kind of security that that we can take for granted here. So, on September 11th in 1941 with Pearl Harbor, when the war really kind of came here for a short amount of time, for them it was lasting. And so I think we as a country are very fortunate that we're strong enough to kind of repel that. We've got a little bit of geography on our side, but we've also got people that get elected and that interact with the elected officials and their fellow citizens, and we kind of shape our policy. We've got a lot of people who are willing to go out and volunteer to kind of protect the things we have. And so for that, I'm thankful. And I think we're lucky in that regard. And really, I think luck kind of has run throughout my entire military career. I was fortunate after I took over that platoon, we didn't sustain a single casualty within our platoon. Later on, came back, became a company commander up in upstate New York, took that company to Kuwait and Iraq, and didn't sustain any casualties there. Very different experience. for that, we were really just doing some base security, but very fortunate. And now I'm fortunate. The Army's got some great programs, and right now I'm in grad school, still active duty at BU, and getting my master's degree before I go and teach at West Point, and hopefully share some of these lessons and experiences, as well as some knowledge about geography with the cadets there. And so another reason I feel like I'm lucky is we have a very small Veterans Association at BU. So if you know anybody that's at BU and a veteran, send them my way. We'd be glad to grow and provide them with some stuff. But it's a good experience in getting to work with them and the other guys that are veterans and now students and kind of share experiences like this. But it's also good because I work with the majority of people who aren't veterans, who don't understand kind of what this is. And from what I can tell, there's very open and people are willing to listen about what being a veteran means and, you know, what's the way to go about it. And so what I share with them is that listen, kind of like what we've got going on here today, and just kind of take it, take what people's experiences are and use it to further your understanding of issues that are going on in the world around us. And for myself, somebody who's going to go back out into the force, into the Army, and who knows what over the next 20 years, because when they send you to grad school, they expect to get paid back in time. So I'm going to be in for a while. So I'm lucky that I'm kind of get to take these experiences from being intermingled in the civilian world and bring it back to the Army and people I serve with and kind of broaden my thoughts. So with that, that's kind of one of the main things I've learned. The other, just a real quick story, I was walking down the hall of BU, and there was a sign on a vending machine that said, "I'm broken, please don't use me." And at first I was like, "Oh, that's creative." And then I thought, how many of us feel that way, you know, on a daily basis? Whether it's a veteran who's come back and who's had some really tough experiences and doesn't want to, you know, have to do anything else. They've earned it. They've earned their kind of solitude and stuff. But for those of us who feel like, you know, we might be broken or might have something wrong, we might not be good enough, I think there's a lot that we have to offer. And that's true of veterans and just people in general. So thank you for having me, and just glad to talk to you.
Thank you, Chris. Our last featured speaker is Moses Morse, and he's an Army veteran of 3 years from Korea. Moses, would you like to stand, or would you like me to bring a mic? And at this time, if there are any other speakers who would like to present their story, please either see me or Neil. Raise your hand, I'll come over and say hello. But please join me in welcoming Moses Morse. What this is.
Good afternoon, and to all the veterans out there, happy Veterans Day. My career as a soldier began on January 10th, 1951, when I enlisted in the United States Army. Actually, my parents raised 4 boys and 2 girls right here on Western Ave in Cambridge, and all their sons went into the armed forces. My oldest brother, he served World War II, and he was on the invasion of Normandy. My other 2 brothers, one of which my twin, he served in the Air Force. My other brother, he served in the field artillery. But I took my basic training down in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And when I got my orders from Fort Devens to go to North Carolina, I called home and I told my mother and father where I was going. My mother broke down and said, "Please be careful down there." She says, "You're not going to be in the North, and stay on the base." I said, "Yeah, okay." But anyhow, we took our training, and I met a guys down there. And one fellow, he was from North Fork, Virginia. He'd never been north. And he wanted to come up to Massachusetts with me. So I said, well, I'll call my parents and see. So we went down to the bus station, and we were going to go to North Fork, Virginia, and pick up his car. And there was two guys from New York, and him from North Fork, and myself and a buddy of mine, Edward Green from Cambridge. So anyhow, we got to the bus station, and we got on the bus, and we're chit-chatting, and then the bus started getting crowded, and we're there, and this was my first bad experience. The bus driver came up and told us that we had to go to the back of the bus. Now here we are, 18 years old to 20 years old. We said, why? He says, so that they can sit down. He was speaking to people, some white people that are going on. So we said, you tell them to go to the back of the bus. We're brash. But he proceeded to go to the front of the bus and come back, and he pointed a gun at us and told us we either go to the back or get off. So we didn't want to give him the satisfaction of that, so we got off. But when we got on the next bus, we said, well, we'll go to the back of the bus so we just won't have this. So anyhow, we proceeded, and we went to North Fork and picked up Cradle's car, and I brought him up here to Massachusetts, and we had a good time. And then we got orders to go overseas, and that was in December 1951. So our orders came down to go to Germany, and I had my older brother over there too in Germany. And when we got to Germany, I was going up this steep hill and my buddy, the one from Cambridge, Tweed, he was looking up. He says, gee, that soldier up there directing the traffic, the MP, look, that looks like your brother. So I said, yeah. So I got up and I started looking. I said, wow, yeah. And eyes caught. And he's looking, I went. And he started running down the hill. I jumped off the truck and ran up the hill, and we grabbed each other. But anyhow, him and I spent that Christmas, 1951, together. And we said, the rest of our parents and brothers and sisters are back home, so we made a toast to them. And then we went overseas, and then it was in April 1952, we had got orders that, the service was being integrated then. So there was 12 of us that was sent to the 109th Field Artillery, 28th Infantry Division. And when we got there was one soldier came down and introduced himself, and he said his name was Coons, and he was from Norfolk, Virginia, West Virginia. So he introduced himself, and he said that, I just want to tip you off. We said, to what? He says, our battalion commander says we were getting in some colored troops, and I want you to be good to them, but you don't have to go out your way. Right then and there, we knew what was coming down. So we proceeded to do the best we could, but then when we would go into the latrines in the morning to wash up, we got wind that some of these white troops didn't want to wash up behind us. So we said, well, we'll fix that. We all went in there together and took every sink there was, and we said, now, if they don't want to wash between us, let them go to the toilets. But that was a bittersweet. And I couldn't believe that when I got to Washington, D.C., like coming back from camp, from furlough, that's when you first started seeing colored white. I said, here it is, the nation's capital, and this is where it's beginning. But anyhow, if I had to do it all over again, I would. The service was a good experience for me, and I'm proud that I did what I had to do, and my parents were lucky that all four of their sons came back home. So to you all out there, good luck to you.
for you here. I'll bring it over to you in a sec. How's that?
Have to stay to skip a week.
All right, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very
I better
much.
sit down there. a
You
minute.
bet, you bet. Here,
Oh, no. I'm gonna just sit here for 1 second.
All right, yeah. I'll help you. Well, thank you again, Moses. Please join me in thanking all of the great speakers. And at this moment, I'd like to call Neil back up here. Neil? Well,
So I just want to give one last call if there are any veterans that would like to speak. Anyone? Nope. All right. I'm going to go a little bit off script just because someone in the audience I just want to give a hearty thanks to. I have a tremendous amount of respect. Loren Crowe, if you don't mind just standing up for a moment. Loren Crowe was our keynote speaker earlier today at the observance, and you know, he and I share a vision for how we'd like to see Veterans Day and how we'd like to see service to veterans from our department. And so the day he emailed and came into my office, it was a very exciting day, because to have someone to come back who had been in combat to talk about some of the same things that I felt in my heart veterans needed, which was community, activities, restorative therapies, and a venue like this, the town hall. This would not have occurred. It would not have been on my radar without Loren Crowe. So a hearty thanks again to Loren Crowe. So thanks for coming to this town hall. And before I close, I just want to read the proclamation that the veterans have received. I really appreciate all of the civilians, as we call you, who have come today to listen to these stories, because it really, this is what it's about. And sorry, Loren, it got a little political in the beginning. You know, there's a field manual, kind of how to do this, and it really emphasizes that this is about the veterans talking to us, sharing their stories for us to hear, or for you to hear. So here's a proclamation, because we love our veterans so much in the city that we couldn't not give something to the veterans that spoke. Actually, Mayor Simmons, do you want to read this? No? Okay. I told her she couldn't talk too much, so. This is what I get. I haven't read this yet, so hopefully I'll get it all right. Whereas on Veterans Day, a nation acknowledges its profound debt and gratitude to the patriots who have kept it whole, America pauses to honor every service member who has ever worn the nation's uniforms. Through the generations, their courage and sacrifice has allowed our republic to flourish. And whereas today you have continued this proud tradition by sharing your story with us here, you have helped to honor all of those who served. You have helped others to see a veteran as a person. You have shown that you are a proud veteran and an integral part of our city. And whereas, as a part of our city, our veterans continue to serve, bringing tremendous skills to their communities and the workforce, Cambridge is proud to support those who have served us with courage, self-sacrifice, and devotion to our nation and to one another. They represent the American character at its best, and whereas on Veterans Day, and every day, we celebrate your contributions, draw inspiration from your example, and renew our commitment to showing all our veterans the fullest support of a grateful city and nation. Now therefore, be it proclaimed that the Honorable Mayor of Cambridge formally goes on record of thanking Cambridge veterans for their tremendous service and sacrifice to the nation on this Veterans Day. Thank you, Mayor Simmons. Thank you, City Council. So we're wrapping up a little early, and we've reserved. I mean, this is small enough. You all can chit chat here if you want, but we have a ton of food, and we have a little community room in the back. If any of you would like to have more of an intimate conversation, but you can have that here. We have the library for another 2 hours, so maybe we can start playing some music and dancing. I don't know. Plenty of time. So thank you so much. Happy Veterans Day to everybody. And I forgot to mention Brian Corr from the Peace Commission, who is also joining us here. So thank you, everybody, so much.